double the number that you have in your mind, because chances are you are undervaluing yourself. And I truly believe that go for the number that you sort of think is your dream number. And then you can always come down from there and negotiate, but it's better to start high and go low than it is to start low and you can't go higher. Exactly. So.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to She's Interesting. I'm your host, Rashel Hariri, and today we are going to have a very laid back conversation all about like living your best life. Today we have with us Palak Dave, the founder of Embiria and ESC, Embiria Social Club. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat today.
I'm so excited to have you here because you know what? I get caught up. I work with a lot of tech companies. I get caught up in that hustle culture. And as much as I try to push away from it and avoid it, I need a reminder sometimes. I need Post-it notes to tell me to cool it. And so I'm glad you're here so that we can talk all about IRL experiences and living your best life. So let's start from the beginning because you have a corporate background as well. And you decided to leave corporate to start this entrepreneurial journey. What sparked the change in your life when you started doing this in 2017?
Yeah, so I never knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I was somebody that was working corporate jobs for 10 years at really reputable companies like Indigo and TIFF. And I liked my corporate jobs. So I like the stability, I like the security, I like the consistent income. But deep down, I always knew that I was meant for something more. And that's when I had this nudge. Like, is this it? I was approaching my 30s and I was close to a director level position. And I thought, if I'm going to be working corporate for the next 30 years, is this all there is? And so that's when that nudge first started happening. Also, being in Toronto, in a busy city, I felt like I was stressed. I was probably one of those people that just didn't take the time for myself. I would find that I'd go to fitness classes and I would walk in and I'd see these same women all the time. We didn't know each other's names and we would walk out and we wouldn't make any connections. And I thought there was a gap there. I'm like, why aren't people hanging around and staying and making friends? So I started to crave community in my own personal life. And that's when the idea sparked that if I'm craving this, I'm sure there's many other women craving community as well. And so that was the first seed of thinking maybe I should host events to bring women together. I didn't know it would turn into a full-time business, but I did know that I wanted to give it a chance and go all in. And I remember having a conversation with my husband thinking, I could always go back to corporate. What should I do? And I was in between actually getting a director role at another job or going all in on potentially trying my own business. And he's like, will you regret this if you don't do it? I'm like, yeah, I will. And I have my resume to fall back on. So I went all in. And my goal the first year was to host 10 events to bring women together. And I ended up doing 50. So it very quickly.
That's such a big change.
Yeah, it was nice to exceed the goal that I had made. But I guess that's when I quickly realized like it was domino effect. Oh, women want this. This isn't just a project that I'm going to do. This is something I have to go all in on because people are telling me that they want it. And it's before I had a website, before I had social media. It was just me putting up an event on Eventbrite and thinking
it's like the desire for women to connect. And so in the last, I guess, 7 years now that you've been doing this, how many events have you thrown?
I've done probably 400.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Do you have a team that works with you? How do you ensure that you keep your head on straight? Because event planning, I've done it before and it's a lot of work, lots of details. And, do you have a team structure around you or do you try to do it all yourself?
So when I started 7 years ago, that's when I quickly realized events do take a lot of work. But what I say is I'm not an event planner. I'm an experience curator. So I'm doing it for the connection and the experience and the feeling that you get behind it. I'm not doing it because I want to have all the like fluff around it, which a lot of events do have. There's a lot of branding that happens and things you have to print and all that. And I'm like, no, I want you to leave feeling a certain way. So that's my signature approach to it, which makes it easier also just from an event planning standpoint. And I'd work with a lot of local Toronto businesses to help partner with them so that I could help awareness for them and me. And it was like a win-win. So I wouldn't necessarily need to plan an event from scratch, but I would be hiring facilitators around the city that were just really good at what they did.
Yeah.
And so it started with me doing it on my own. And I would then just bring on ambassadors for the brand that wanted exposure to event planning or to understand the business a bit more. They would pop up at the events, but I've probably been to 98% of the events myself. And it's a lot. So I was doing about 4 to 5 a month before the pandemic.
That is a lot.
Which was a lot, and various parts of the city. So I'd be doing like a creative workshop at the Drake Hotel. And then I would move over to Boxcar Social for like an art night. And then I would do a cooking class or a paint night or a dinner in Summerhill. And it was just me bouncing around. And that obviously was not sustainable. And so when the pandemic happened, I welcomed the pause. I was ready to take a breather and reevaluate, like, is this a business model that works? To be honest, events are not a huge moneymaker unless you're doing it to scale.
Well,
So
that's what I was going to ask you is how do you go from knowing that you want to have an experience, not the traditional like event approach, and then how do you monetize that? Because I think for listeners today who may have an idea of something that they want to do and they know that they want to make money off of it, obviously, how did you bridge that gap and how do you know like how to charge? Let's get into like the business side of things for a second.
yeah, this is a great question. I feel like the first year when I left corporate, what I knew is that I needed a runway. There was no way I was going to be able to do this and just hope that I make money from revenue of ticket sales
Yeah.
to then fund and match my corporate salary, which wasn't going to happen. So I gave myself a year.
Mhm.
So I'd actually planned for like a year's worth of savings if I was to put that aside,
Great advice.
make no money, and then just be able to like pump that back into the business. So that held me over. I also knew, at the time I'm with my husband who at the time had a corporate job and was very stable in his career. So that obviously helped as well, just from a risk factor.
Oh, for sure.
I'm totally a risk averse person. So me thinking of entrepreneurship, I was like, there's no way. And it
has to be done in the safest way possible.
Literally. And I'm still that way.
I'm the same.
Yeah. It's deep down. It's like, we want to do more, but then it's embedded in us to be able to do it in a way that's safe and secure.
Right.
So I'd only take so many risks. I'm not somebody that's going to like
bet it all.
Exactly. No. So I wasn't doing that. But I realized over time, so what I was doing these public ticketed events and I would be making money from those, just putting it all back into the business. And after about a year, I started to like gain momentum and I found that agencies were coming to me. So then the business model started changing a bit because now I'm dealing with like B2B and being able to go to an agency or a brand and say, hey, I'm able to curate a series of events for you versus one-offs. They obviously have bigger budgets and they're willing to do more. And so that was when the business started to gain that momentum for me to say, oh, this is financially viable. That being said, that's when sort of the pandemic hit. And so I had to pivot a bunch. I wrote a book during that time, which
is just released now, right? It's the same book?
It just came out this year, 4 years in the making.
We'll drop a link in the show notes so you guys can grab a book.
It's 4 years in the making. It's one of those things I don't think I would have done it if the pandemic hadn't given me the time to be creative and allow that to be my creative outlet.
It's like a forced creativity.
Exactly.
I feel like during the pandemic, a lot of people, they had these ideas and epiphanies and they changed their lives. I did. I quit my corporate job, but it forced you in this like pressure cooker environment to decide, how do you want to live the rest of your life, knowing that something so large like this impacted everybody.
Exactly. And one thing I knew that a lot of the activities within the book were actually things I was doing in my life at home during the pandemic. So it was a very like lived experience for me to then launch that. And now coming out of the pandemic in terms of a business model, looking at it, knowing events are not sustainable, unless you're like a create and cultivate, or unless you're actually running a large conference, you can't really do the intimate events without either having brand sponsorship or something that gives you the funding to be able to do it. And so I've evolved the model since then. So it went from Embiria to now Embiria Social Club, which is a membership-based model. And the reason I did that was obviously for the reoccurring revenue, but also for the fact that if I have this sort of funds that I can actually tap into at any time, I'm able to host better events. I'm able to then partner with brands and sort of have more clout around this membership base that I'm growing. These women were connecting anyway. It was just a matter of how do I get them to connect all the time? I don't want them to just come to an event and then leave and then never know each other.
And also then have a space where it's easy for them to gather, connect, and reach out to each other at any time that they want. Versus I find sometimes you go to events and you leave and you have their LinkedIn or their email, or you're like, do I text this person? It's kind of awkward. But if you're already part of a community, then you can just easily message or someone starts a thread and you guys can all talk, which is nice.
That was the biggest factor. It was that I would see women come to the events, they'd exchange Instagram handles or WhatsApp info, and they would kind of forget about messaging each other. And I'm like, how do I create an online hub for connection, but then with the goal of that hub to be to move that connection offline? Because I don't want us to stay behind our screens and I don't want us to just be on our devices all day. I want women to then take that and form friendships in real life and actually go out and experience things.
Yeah. Have you found any tips or tricks that you can share with our audience when you're connecting with larger brands that you want to partner with? So this is something that people have asked me as well. Like, if we want to write a pitch deck and connect with a certain brand, what's the best way to write it? How do we reach out to these brands? Do we even know that they're going to want to work with us? And I know you've had experience with Lululemon and a bunch of other large brands. Let's dig into that a little bit. What was that process like? And is it a matter of just like the constant follow up until they listen?
This is a great question because I love to say I've never written a pitch deck. So in my life, I've never actually had to do one other than my corporate jobs. But for Embiria, I've not written a pitch deck. And a lot of my partnerships have either come from an Instagram DM or a quick email, just talking to a brand and that initial contact,
Yeah.
or word of mouth, which is really nice because I think a lot of the women that come to my events, they either work for a company that then they think would be great for a partner for me,
Yeah.
or it's just people reaching out to me, which is really nice. But when I do talk about partnerships, and I do a lot of them, and I've been doing them for 7 years now, and even in my corporate positions, it was always the angle of what are you able to provide to the partner? They just want to know what you're going to give them. And a lot of times now that's about reach and numbers and, tell me how much engagement you
Exactly.
have and all the social stuff. But I go beyond that because I think that's all great. And I think it's amazing to have, the followers and the audience. But I think that even if you have a little micro following, I do think that you can provide so much value. I mean, I was doing that when I didn't have that many followers and I was running events and partnering with brands. And I was able to do it from a standpoint of, hey, you're a fellow woman owned business. I am too. Why don't we collaborate? I'd love to share
Beautiful.
about your brand.
Yeah.
And I found that got me the most beautiful and authentic partnerships that I was then able to hold long term versus just, oh yeah, I have 10,000 followers and it's great. I'm going to post about this. I always say that I like to do experiences that leave an impression longer than a 10-second reel.
Yeah.
Because it's not about that. It's about building that relationship. So.
And then the next question becomes a matter of understanding how much to charge for these things.
Yes.
Because so I've always been on the receiving side where I would get pitches. I worked at like Shopify and McDonald's and we would decide who we wanted to work with. But being on the other side, and we know that the creator economy is growing and a lot of women are out there, they're trying to grow their audiences. They're trying to grow their businesses, whether it's, a candle shop to, like a perfumery that they're creating, but how can they set the value for what they're putting out in the world? Because we do have this idea that we undercharge or we undersell ourselves.
I've definitely undersold myself.
Which honestly, I think it's in the beginning, it's fine. Everybody has that moment where they're like, damn, I think I could have got more for that. But it's a learning.
It's interesting that you talk about this because it's happened to me recently, even with public speaking. So I've done a lot of speaking engagements. I've done keynotes. I've moderated panels. And only when I hired a business coach earlier this year was she like, why are you doing this for free? And it was such a great point of being like, you're absolutely right. I am an expert in my field. And as
Yes.
women, I think it takes a lot to get to that point after hosting 400 events, after doing all the things I've done, after,
If you ever needed validation, that's it.
Exactly. Yeah. But yet I still was like, oh, I'll do it for free because of the awareness. And I think a lot of us feel we'll do it for the awareness and what the opportunities are that it might bring, which is great. And things like that have brought me a lot of opportunities. But at some point, you have to value your time and you have to look at when you're evaluating projects, it does matter if you're going to get paid for them or not and where your time's going to go, where your resources are going to go. And so when it comes to that, I absolutely think that women undercharge a lot. I think the number that you have in your mind, you can often double it, which is very interesting to me.
Can we say that again so everybody, it sinks in?
Double the number that you have in your mind because chances are you are undervaluing yourself. And I truly believe that go for the number that you sort of think is your dream number. And then you can always come down from there and negotiate, but it's better to start high and go low than it is to start low and
then you
can't
have nowhere
go
to
higher.
go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
the success that you've built over the last 7 years, but you talk a lot about like the beauty and the simplicity of life and taking time to enjoy the coffee and like baking bread and all of this stuff. How do you balance the mindset of being an entrepreneur and wanting to set ambitious goals with then not losing touch with like the softer side of life? Because I feel like that balance is so difficult. I really don't know anyone who does that well. And I'm looking for my examples.
yeah, this is a very, it's an area I could talk about for a long time because I actually don't think there is such thing as balance. I think there's something called integration or a rhythm that you can find in your life, but I don't necessarily think, especially if you're an entrepreneur and you have ambitious goals, that you can achieve balance per se. But I think there is an integration that you can find. So, for example, for me, that looks like being able to have the freedom and flexibility in my schedule that allows me to feel that I'm fulfilled in my day to day. So, for example, on a Monday morning, I I remember when I worked corporate, it would be like, oh, I don't want to, get up early on a Monday, the Sunday scaries, whatever, all the things that happen. Now that I have the freedom in my own schedule, I actually take a few hours on a Monday morning to do whatever I decide that I want to do
Mhm.
because I'm allowed to do that. And I should make those rules for myself. I am my own boss. And so it's almost like I have to give myself the permission to do
Yes.
it, which is really interesting. But I think we as women need to give ourselves permission slips to say, it's okay. You deserve this. You're working hard. You're doing great. Take the time. And so for me, that looks like on a Monday, I actually will try not to start work until about 11 a.m. So that might mean a long walk on the beach with my dog and my husband. It might mean going for a coffee, doing a form of movement that I really like, journaling, or just like tidying up around the house so that I feel like clearer when I'm starting my week. And I try and do the same thing on Friday afternoons because that's just like a little ritual that I want to create for myself to remind myself that I worked hard to get here and I deserve to be able to take those moments. So I don't think I've achieved balance in that sense, but I do think that there are moments and it ebbs and flows. And I also have heard a lot of entrepreneurs talk about the fact that there will be sprints in your life. And it's like you will be pushing when you're launching something or
Mhm.
something's a big project that you're working on. You're going to have sprints where you are pushing harder than you'd like, probably taking a toll on your balance or,
Absolutely.
that sort of rhythm. But then you have to be able to go into those rest periods and fully rejuvenate in order to hit those sprints again. And so I found a little bit of solace in that, knowing that there are times that I'm super busy. When I was launching the book, that was an example. And then after I launched the book, I was like, okay, I need to take a breather. I need a little bit of downtime. I need to like recuperate from this, but also just let it sink in because I do
Mhm.
think we are also striving to achieve the next thing. And we're constantly, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? But let's recognize and acknowledge the moment that we're in as well.
How do you stop yourself from getting into that cycle? Because I find that I get into this. Even like, for example, you're talking about your book. There's momentum with the book that you've launched. And it's very easy to be like, well, now I got to do the next thing and then the next thing. And we need to keep growing it. And I need to do socials and I need to do more interviews. And it can so quickly snowball. So, and I'm someone where if I see something's getting traction, I want to go, go, go. And so at what point do you decide is the right time to take a pause or slow down? Especially because we live in a society where you constantly want to be productive. You constantly want to be winning. Quote, I'm using air quotes for those who are listening. How do you find that balance? Because I have a big, and I'm sure everyone listening too feels this way, or many people feel this way. I carry a lot of guilt with that, where I'm like, why am I not doing more?
Yeah, I love this, and I love that you're going deeper on it because it does need to be explored. I think that there is a
You're
guilt
like, go
there.
to therapy.
Yeah, no, literally, but literally therapy, business coach, like literally having
Get
a
some
business
help.
coach is like therapy for your business. I
Yeah.
talk to women about this a lot and it comes up with mostly everyone I know
Yeah, it's
that's an
tough.
entrepreneur. It's very tough. And I'll give you an example with the book. For example, this year, I knew that I wanted to have the book launched this year. I also knew that my goal was to get it into Indigo because I wanted it to be able to sell in a way that it's distributed and I'm not thinking about it. And so that happened this year. And that to me should be a huge win. It was on my list and it's a goal. And yet I found myself thinking of the next thing. I was like, that's great. But now I need book signings happening in all stores and I need to figure out what flagship stores it's going to be in and what's the holiday strategy. And I found my
There you
mind
go.
racing to that. And then I had to stop and take a pause. It's almost like the art of noticing. You have to recognize how far you've come. If I looked at my goals, I put by December 2024, I want to be available at Indigo with the book. And I am. And it happened 2 months before that.
There you
So
go.
why am I not acknowledging that as a win? And so I do keep even like a log of weekly wins. I add to it all the time. So I have
Mhm.
a notebook right beside my desk. Anytime something great happens, it's going down in my weekly wins because we don't take the time to do that. And when you do, and you look back at that week of weekly wins, you're like, wow, I'm actually pretty great. But I don't remind myself and I don't tell myself those things. So we have to, because no one's going to necessarily, you're gonna get pats on the back, but they're not as meaningful as when you believe it from within.
What are some systems and processes you have in place that help you? Like, are there certain days of the week where you do different types of work? Do you outsource certain things? How can we share your productivity tips with those who are listening today? So, if they're in a tough place, and I find a lot of people are at that burnout stage in the fall. So, if like fall, winter, how they can kick it up a notch without exhausting themselves.
Yeah. So I don't know if you've read the book 10X is Easier Than 2X.
I have not.
Okay.
Tell us.
So this is a great book and I highly recommend it for anyone that is looking to build and scale their own business. But I apply the model from there, which
Mhm.
is there are separate days for separate things, similar to the idea of batch working, which you're probably familiar with,
Mhm.
batching like-minded tasks together so that you're not like in and out of flow.
Yeah.
But this takes it a step further where there's something called focus days, there's free days, and then there's buffer days. So there's 3 types of days that you're looking at splitting your time into. They actually recommend having 2 full free days, which free days means you're doing no work. You are letting yourself rest, you're letting yourself be. There's nothing on the calendar. I think it's very hard to achieve that, but apparently a lot of the most successful people do, because if you allow yourself to have that, you will actually find more efficiencies in your day-to-day throughout the week. You'll
That
be
makes
able to be
sense.
more rested. It totally makes sense.
It's like a reset. And with those
Exactly.
2 free days, it's not like your Saturday and Sunday where they're consecutive. It's just any 2 days during
Any
the
2
week.
days. It doesn't have to be consecutive, which so if it's a Monday for you and that's the time that you can do it, great. Even start with 1 if it's not 2 days and you feel more comfortable with 1. But it kind of makes me think back to, back in the day, Sundays was a day of rest.
That's right.
It wasn't a day that we went out and worked and did all the things and needed to post on social media and talk about what we're doing on the weekend. We were resting and things were closed. The malls were closed. People would often gather with their families. Some people would go to church. It was a day of rest. And that's what prepped you for the week ahead. And so those free days are around that idea. So then you have your free days, but then you have your focus days. So focus days are about 3 days a week that are spent focusing on things that will actually move the dial in your business. So they're not admin tasks. They're not things that are just writing emails to people. It's actual focus where you're doing the work that matters, that's going to make a difference in your business. And then you have buffer days, which are meant for quick meetings, checking in, writing your emails. And I just find that splitting the tasks up like that makes so much sense, because if you don't manage it, you're going to spend all your days as buffer days. They're going to be like doing little tasks that you think are moving the dial, but they're not. And suddenly you're operating at that sort of 2X of your business. If you want to 10X your business, you have to spend time strategizing and focusing on those focus days.
And I think that I kind of had an aha moment there where you can 10x the joy that you get from your business without leaning into that hustle culture and without feeling like you have to run yourself into the ground, which is how I feel sometimes.
I feel that too. I will say that having a European husband, it was a reality check for me when I met him, for him to give me this. It was so funny because he's literally so different than I am. I remember when I worked at TIFF and it was the film festival, we were planning our wedding and he's like, let's get married in September. And I'm like, the
That's
film
insane.
festival happens in September. I would never do that.
Yeah.
And over time, he's like, it's just a job. I'm like, it's not just a job. It's like my identity. And
It's my
I felt
life.
so strongly about it.
Yeah.
And he actually ended up convincing me to get married in September. And it really was for me just an awakening, because I remember being in Europe and nobody asked me what I did for work. I was meeting all these people and it just really reset my approach to life and work and my identity. And I realized, of course, your career and your purpose and all of that is so important. But at the same time, if you're not living, what are you doing? And so for me, living and actually having those experiences day to day is just a constant reminder. And he'll notice it. Now it's like if I'm stressed or I'm like high strung about something and I'm just like running around because I have so much going on, he's just like, okay, you're clearly overwhelmed and you need to take a second. And so I'm doing it for myself more and more now after he's pointed it out. I think it's like I have to check in with myself. But I think we're all operating on this like hamster wheel. And it's like, how do we get off? And how do we take a few moments before sort of racing back into things again? And I'm seeing it more and more now, but it's essential to our well-being and our businesses. Like you can't thrive if you're operating from a place of feeling depleted and exhausted.
And it's something that I think we have to work really hard to reset mentally, especially if you come from an immigrant background. Like my parents immigrated here from Iran. So for me, it's like, I feel like I have to work hard. I feel like I need to excel and I need to be super smart and bright and like be great at everything. And I think it's just because that's the mentality of the culture that we're born into,
Mm.
and always like striving to be your best.
Yeah, I'm going to share a personal story that relates to that because I also come from an immigrant family. And my parents worked super hard to build, obviously, the lives that they have for my sister and I, given
Mhm.
us the opportunity for me to like go to U of T to get such a great education, to then work great corporate jobs.
And then to quit those corporate jobs,
Exactly.
right?
So it's like, oh yeah, okay, this is coming full circle. What's happening?
Yeah.
But what is really interesting about when I really dig deep as to why I'm so passionate about getting people to live in the present and enjoy their journey and not just like this end destination. And it's because when I was 15, my dad passed away, a massive heart attack, and it was very sudden. And what the thing that taught me really, and obviously it was a very traumatic event, but it's taught me the lessons about the way that I live my life, because
Mhm.
he spent his entire life working hard. He did not take the vacations. He did not do the plans of, let me take time off work. He worked so hard, and he constantly talked about retirement. When I retire, I'll take a trip with your mom. When I
Oh,
retire, I'll take a
yeah.
trip with you guys. I'll do this. And he had all these plans, and he never got to do that. And it really wasn't until I dug deep as to like, why do I want to live every moment to the fullest and take trips and build the life that I want with freedom and flexibility? And it's because life is not guaranteed. We don't know that. And only when you do face a traumatic event will that put things into perspective. So I'm here to really tell women, I don't want you to face those tough things. I want you to know that, it's going to happen to everyone. Life is not infinite. And so we really have to remember every day that this is all we have. All we have is the moment. So if you're not enjoying it and you're feeling stressed throughout all of it, what is the point?
That's right. That's why you created beautiful everydays. There you
Exactly.
go.
Exactly.
I really appreciate you sharing that with us because it's nice to get a real perspective on life. Recently, I was reflecting a lot on a podcast that I listened to that was talking about end of life and how you should always, if you want to live well, think about what would be on top of your mind at your end of life. How do you plan for your end of life will essentially tell you how you should be living now because that's where your values lie. And no one is going to be thinking, oh, I wish I should have worked more. I should have done X, Y, and Z. If at the end of your life, when you're in your deathbed, you're going to be thinking, I wish I traveled more. I wish I used that fancy, china that my grandma gave me that I didn't use at all. Just take the joys, do the things that you can on a daily basis. Have that $6 latte because that's not what's making you broke. It's the fact that you're not investing is making you broke. It's not the $6 latte.
Yes, exactly. I
I'm
totally, I
like,
know. I was like,
it's like poetry.
totally.
I would really love to know your mentality about money. Are you an abundance personality? Has your POV on money changed over the years?
It's a complicated question. I feel
Mm.
like I'm navigating my journey with money. My dad was an accountant, so I grew up thinking that I had to save all my money, and that's what I did. So I'm a really good saver. I invested at a young age. I, got my RSPs and I have everything set up. I invested in property at a young age. And so all of those things led me to be successful now. And I had a corporate job with consistent income. So that really helped in my 20s. But then now that I've started my own business and had it for 7 years, my relationship with money is completely different because I'm realizing things that matter when it comes to a business, like cash flow. Are you going to pay yourself? Do you have staff that you need to pay? Are you outsourcing your work? You need an accountant to get your stuff together. So only in the past few years am I really trying to set up my business in a way that allows me to have that abundance and even just open up my mentality around how much money I can earn. Because I think that it's so different when you work a corporate job versus starting your own business and really navigating those complexities with money. I read a lot of books around money too, and
Mhm.
just money mindset, because at the end of the day, money is just an energy exchange. And I really do think that anything that's limiting when it comes to money is all around your mindset and your limiting beliefs. And if you can break through those, you can have an abundance mindset and like the world is your oyster.
It's true. And I think having an abundance mindset doesn't mean you're trying to be a multi-millionaire. It just means that your relationship with money is positive and you know that you can attract and have that money. I think both of us like Ramit Sethi. Do you like him as
Yes,
well? Yeah.
I do.
He is wonderful.
My
Something
rich life, always thinking about what I want my
Yeah.
rich life to be.
My problem though is I like a lot of things. So my rich life really is expensive. And so I'm trying to figure that out.
Your
Like
rich life is really rich.
it's really freaking expensive. And so my problem right now is figuring out the essentials. Like when we say my rich life, what does that specifically mean? What are the actual things that make you feel like you are living in an abundance life versus like going shopping and buying X, Y, and Z. Those things are trends. Those clothes are going to go out of style. That's not my rich life. So do you have any tips around that?
Oh, my rich life is when I turn left on the plane and I'm going into business class.
Ooh.
That's like, it's like a non-negotiable of I've experienced it. I know what it's like. And so when I'm working towards what my rich life is, that is it. Because once you have that experience, you do not want to go back.
Oh, no.
Like, I will do what it takes to get this lie down pod that I can be in and get my cheese plate before I go to bed. So yeah, that's been something I've been working on. And I do think having that rich life, it's what you said, it's not necessarily things, but it's also a feeling. So for me, you know, obviously the business class, it feels amazing.
Oh,
It's the experience around it, right? It's like turning left on the plane or being able to check in first or being able to have a separate lounge that you're hanging around in. And I guess because my brand's all about experiences, I obviously value those things, but I will think about what will this like bring to my life? And that could be a really nice bag, but it's just that you feel more confident when you're walking with that bag, or you just feel like you've attained a level of success because you worked really hard and you want to like give yourself something nice. So I'm learning more and more. I would say before I only would spend on experiences versus things.
Yeah.
Now I think there's room for both, but it is what you said. It's figuring out what it is for you and the value that it's actually bringing to your life.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on She's Interesting. This has been such a nice conversation. It really has actually mellowed me out since talking to you. So I appreciate that.
Oh, I'm glad.
I feel like I'm like cozy. I need a blanket and a tea right now.
Oh, that makes me happy. That's literally my mission. So I love that you feel that.
So tell everyone where they can find you and where they can grab your book.
Yeah, amazing. You can find me on Instagram at PalDave, PALDAVE. You can grab my book if you're in Canada, indigo.ca. The US, it's Amazon or Barnes & Noble. And you can also find me at Embiria.ca.
Amazing. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in again and supporting She's Interesting. Be sure to rate and review the podcast and follow us across Instagram and TikTok. We've got some great, helpful content out there for you. Have a beautiful day.